Hebrews chapter 10 and 12 and 11 in between. That doesn't make much sense, I know. Hebrews 10, let's start there. It's a great text tonight for you to see how things work in context, how everything connects together and what it can mean for application. I hope it'll be a good example. In 1914, Sir Ernest Shackleton, he organized a transatlantic expedition to cross Antarctica. Their ship was called the Endurance. Really apropos because it foreshadowed all the struggles that they would face. They set off about the beginning of World War I, or right in the middle of that war. And what we read from his journals is that it was a bad year for ice in Antarctica. And I can't imagine what year wouldn't be. In February 1915, the ship became completely frozen in sea ice. And they were 1 day's sail away from where they were trying to get to. They never made it. They drifted for a while as it was frozen in a block of ice. And of course, it was very bitter and cold. For a while, because they were so far up there, it was 24-hour darkness. They couldn't see anything. And they thought, as they were enduring on the Endurance, that when summer came, the summer would melt the ice and they would be able to be set free from the ice that they were really entrapped in. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't to be true. In fact, summer passed and fall came again. And in October, they sprang a leak in their boat. And then basically at that point, they knew that the trip and the voyage was beyond hope. So what they started to do is unpack everything they possibly could from the boat to keep it afloat longer. And so they decided they were going to go as far as they could, and they went to an outpost, and they were going to have to go on foot in Antarctica. Can you believe it? So they went on foot, and the first place they decided to make camp, they call it Dump Station. And the reason is because they dumped everything they possibly could to have the lightest load as they traveled. And so not too long after that, they had moved westward a little bit, and they went to the second place, and they called the second place Ocean Camp. And that was because when they were at this camp, their entire ship sank. Now they are stranded on foot in Antarctica. They had no radio, no rescue, and they stayed in that camp for an entire month. Again, moving more westward, what they found is that as they did, the ice was completely non-negotiable. They really couldn't get around it much. And so the third camp they established, they'd called Patience Camp, meaning they didn't know how long they had to survive. And they were going to be patient, and hopefully they would make it out of there. They had one small boat that they had taken from the big boat. And they decided to put it in the water, and they were going to point in the direction of Elephant Island and see if they could make it there. They started off, and they finally reached that area, and they had been gone on their journey for 497 days in Antarctica. After they went to Elephant Island, and that wasn't any help, they did make it to another island not too far away 4 months later. And at the next island, they were rescued after being on the trip to Antarctica for 2 whole years. I read that, and I said, wow, that is endurance. That is endurance. But let me ask you, have you ever felt like your life was a ship like the Endurance? That you spend your life trying to go from one problem to another, trying to get out of that, trying to get past that. Did you ever think that it goes on so long, so many different things that you really don't know if you have hope beyond your situation. That's how they felt. You ever had to watch literally your ship sink? Something you'd put your hopes in, dreams, which you based a lot of your life upon, gone, completely gone. You ever spend a few days, a few weeks, a few months, a few years in patience camp? You say, Pastor Walker, I lived in patience camp. You don't even know how long. I'm a charter member of patience camp. You might say, because I've lived in patience camp. That's what my marriage has been. Maybe you're still there in your chronic health struggles, and you go from one pill to one surgery to another procedure, and you're there. You work daily at your job, which could easily be called patience camp. You say, Pastor Walker, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been there. I am there. And you know what we all need? Whether you're in that list of things or not, whether that's been your experience or not, what we all need is endurance. All of us. More often than we probably recognize and probably deeper than we recognize. It's an important trait for all of us. In fact, one of the doctrines of grace is the perseverance of the saints. Is that God's people will endure. They keep going. They keep the faith, even in the most difficult of circumstances. So I have a little phrase about endurance, a little bit of a definition. And endurance is this, and I try to be catchy. Endurance is to run long when the pain is strong and quitting is wrong. And I want to look at all of those tonight. Endurance is to run long when the pain is strong and quitting is wrong. I'm sure you have figured out as a believer, as long as you have been, that the Christian life is not a sprint, it's a marathon. I don't know if you know the original story of how the marathon came into existence, but there was a guy, a Greek guy, he was actually a soldier. His name was Phidippides. Phidippides was in the battle between the Greeks and the Persians, and they won. And so the general sent him to run back to Athens from Marathon, where the battle was being fought, and it was about 25 miles. And so he ran there. He came upon it after he finished the 25-mile run. He got into Athens. He cried out, Nike, and we say Nike shoes. And it means, Greek, it means victory. And within an hour, he collapsed and died because of the exhaustion that and the energy he put out from running that race. Many, many, many centuries later, in fact, more near to our time, in 1898, the Olympics started all over again. And they were held first again in London, England. And today's distance of a marathon is 26 miles and 385 yards. And you want, why? Well, the first new Olympics was the race ran from Windsor Castle all the way across the city to White City Stadium. That was 26 miles. But they added an additional 385 yards because when you got into the stadium, you had to run around the track all the way around till you got to in front of the royal box where the king or queen was sitting. And that was what a marathon was. That's the distance. And ever since 1898, we've kept that. And you have to go 26 miles, 385 yards to run a marathon. And can I tell you this? You can't sprint it. Oh, you've seen people try, and amazingly so, at the end, they run 26 miles and they actually sprint the last little bit. Well, some of them do. But I can tell you this, because I never have been a sprinter. But I've tried to be a distant runner, and I really wasn't that either, to be honest with you. I'm really good from running to the couch to the refrigerator. I'm really excellent at that. But there's a big difference between sprinting and running a marathon. 63,360 inches in a mile. One step, 30 inches. You know how many steps in a marathon? 55,334. Oh, that's a big difference, isn't it? Yeah, it is. Because you need endurance, not just to run it, listen, to finish it. The recipients of the book of Hebrews were Roman Christians, some Jewish and some Gentile, and they were under a difficult situation. They were in Rome and things were starting to be difficult for Christians. They were being persecuted, and in our text, they were having their goods plundered. People were taking their homes. We don't know if it was because of riots against Christians. We don't know if it was a government thing that came in and took their land when they found out they were Christians. We don't know the case, but they were beginning to suffer. And what they desperately needed in their situation, just like you and I at times desperately needed in ours, is endurance. If you look at your text in chapter 10 and verse 32, and then also in verse 36, circle it because we're going to make big brackets in chapter 10 and 12 and show you what the purpose of chapter 11, which I know you think everybody knows that, and there's lots of ways to look at it, don't get me wrong. 10:32 says, you endured, circle that. You endured a hard struggle with suffering. You endured it. What did it mean? Well, the next verse in 33 says that they were publicly exposed. They lost a lot. It's, in fact, the word means exposed means theater. It's like someone put them on a social stage in front of everybody else and publicly exposed them as Christians, and it was very painful. They lost a lot. In fact, sometimes they were getting hurt physically. So he says the obvious truth as a result in verse 36, circle it a second time, for you have need for, is the little word explaining reason, for you have need of endurance. But why? It's followed by a purpose clause. You see it? So that. Here's why you need it. Here's the purpose why you need it. So that when you have done the will of God, in other words, after you did what God wants you to do, then you will receive what is promised. And all throughout chapter 11, it's about all the people of faith who had to do what God wanted to, and then their whole life, they never received the promises, and they never got all the promises that God gave them. And here's what he's saying. You know how you have to endure? You know what the real hard part about it is? Is that you have to go through all the struggling and all the sufferings, and the fulfillment of the promises may not be in your life. It's hard. And so you get to chapter 12, if you'll turn over there, and you'll see that Paul in Hebrews writes 4 more times. Verse 1, verse 2, verse 3, verse 7. Big bracketed passage, I should say. In chapter 12, verse 1, these are familiar to us. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of martyrs, witnesses, testimonies, let us lay aside every weight and sin which clings to us so closely, things that distract us, keep us impediments is what it is. And let us run with endurance, there it is, circle it, the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him, second, endured, there it is again, endured the cross, despising the shame. Verse 3, consider him, there it is, who endured. Think on Jesus. Think through his life and his death, and think about him when you're going through your times of endurance. Verse 7, it is for discipline that you have to endure. So here's our writer. He's trying to tell them, because listen, in the first century there were 2 types of Christians. Ones that had enduring faith, and at the end of chapter 10, those who were shrinking back, literally, listen to this, to destruction. So there were people whose faith looked real until they had to endure. And they had to endure some really bad things. And when they got to that place, they said, I don't want to go. I don't want to do this. I don't want to pay this cost. And they wanted to go back into Judaism because it was safer and more secure there. And they demonstrated that their faith wasn't real because they shrunk back. And he says, but we're not those who shrink back into destruction. That's not who you are. He's writing to encourage them. Don't go back. Don't quit running. Don't give up. And so he wants to tell us, how do you do it? See, that's why you're here. That's why we're here for the endurance test, I should say, the message tonight. You know why? We want to know how. How do I keep going through cancer? How do I keep going in a relationship that is one-sided and certainly lopsided? How do I keep going when I'm the only one in my family who's going that direction? How do I keep going when I put my heart and soul into my children and they're not interested in the things of God? How do you keep going in those circumstances? Paul Stoltz wrote an article on the difference between IQ and what he calls AQ. In the article, he points out that for many, many years, the predominant view of seeing or measuring the potential of people was to see what their intelligent quotient, their IQ was. However, in his research, he argues that too many people with very high IQs end up being failures in life. So he said we shouldn't really measure people and their potential by their IQ, but rather their AQ. And he calls that their adversity quotient. And he says this in the article. Adversity quotient is how much can a person endure? Because that will be the difference between failure and success. Not how much they know, but how much they can endure. Can I tell you this? Between the two brackets at the end of chapter 10 and the beginning of chapter 12 is the chapter that we all dearly love, and rightly so. But can I tell you this? You know what it is? It is a chapter filled with every person in it is someone who has a high AQ. Someone who has a high adversity quotient. And between the end of 10 and the beginning of 12 is example after example after example of people who have enduring faith. People who in very sharp crisis did not shrink back, but held on to their faith through some of the most difficult ordeals and impossible situations that you could face in their day, and I would guess even in ours. So what do we need? Two things. Two things if you're going to be able to endure. The first one is this: you need to look backward. The second one is, we'll see in a little bit, is you need to look forward. You need to have both. You can't have one or the other. It's not either or. It is both and for sure. So let's look at our text. Chapter 12, verse 1. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. Let me stop there. The very first word, therefore, tells you that what he's saying in verse 1 is built off of what he just said all throughout chapter 11. Therefore, since all these cloud of witnesses, all the cloud of witnesses are all the people who give testimony by faith all throughout chapter 11, all the way from Abel all the way to the present time. All of these people are the ones who are sitting in the stadium and the crowd is cheering them on. And it's like everybody, the famous people of the Old Testament, are cheering on the people who are running in this day when he wrote the epistle to keep going and finish. And they want to communicate this to them, listen, and to us. Here's what it is. We made it. We finished. You can too. Which, by the way, I wrote down in my text, means this: running the faith marathon can never be a solo attempt. It has to be a community effort. Notice what it says. Therefore, since we, not you, we do it together. We need the example of others so that we can endure. We need community so that, like them, we can follow in their steps, learn from their example, and how they went through the difficulties they faced. And if you go through, and I won't list them all, but here's a way, at least one way of looking at Hebrews 11. Abel endured murderous violence from his brother. Enoch endured by living a life in its entirety in a way that pleased God, no matter what anyone else was doing around him in his generation. Noah endured ridicule for 120 years while he built the ark and obeyed God. Abraham endured waiting for so many years, 25 am I correct, to get Isaac as his son. And when his son came, he endured having to give him up as an offering. Abraham endured waiting all those years. Joseph endured being sold by his brothers into slavery. Egyptians in slavery. from the age of 17 to 30, 13 years, he endured a lot of things that he did not deserve so that God could use him. Moses endured the wilderness for 4 decades. Daniel endured the lion's den. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego endured a fiery furnace. And you go on, and it's not just in chapter 11 that you see all these examples of people who endured, but it even catalogs the things they endured. The idea is so that you can identify not with just the heroes by name, but the experiences they had, so that you can make comparisons. Chapter 11, one of its greatest features is to give in perspective on endurance. Can I list some of the things they endured? Suffering, mocking, flogging, chains, imprisonment, stoned, destitute, mistreated, wandered, afflicted, sawn in half, and on the list goes. Can I tell you a little side note? I say it all the time, and I'll keep saying it. You need to purposely read biographies. You need to read the life of John Patton, Charles Simeon, who was locked. His people, I told you maybe before, back then they had pews. They had a little piece of a wooden rack over here, and you'd have to pick it up to sit in there because pews were designated to certain people, especially if you had money. That's how it was. So Charles Simeon replaced a very famous pastor, and people didn't like him as much. And so what they did is they forced everybody, you couldn't come and open, you couldn't sit in the pew because people would stand there and not let you. So if you wanted to hear Charles Simeon, you'd have to stand in the aisles or in the back. And that happened, ready, for 5 years. He was pastor of that church, which became greatly influential. In fact, one of the key churches in England in that time period, he pastored that church for 50 years. On the way home from church, after the pew thing was over, he was attacked by one of his parishioners who tried to kill him on the way back home from church. He stayed there 50 years. You know how you get endurance? You read people. You read people's lives and what they endured. Hudson Taylor, who stayed and didn't have a single convert for 7 years. But he stayed, and God used him. William Carey, 20 years of manuscript and translation up in fire, and he started all over again until he was finished. You know what they do? They tell us this: keep running. I love the heroes we have at Faith Baptist. For Nancy Rolone and Judy, and John Coleman had surgery on his knees recently. Phil and Carol Gray, I asked her, can I come over and see you this week? You can't come today. Phil is not doing well. I'll call you or let you know of another day. I waited a couple days. Hey, can I come? No, today's not a good day. And then the ladies went over on Saturday. I'm getting a complex. They had a good day. How would you like that? How would you like to wake up every day knowing this? I don't know if it's going to be a good day. I don't know how things are going to go. Kim Pinelli, back surgery after back surgery. Judy Jester with multiple cancer. And on it goes. And that's just the physical things, not the relational things that people, as we hear tonight, even struggle with. But the Bible says this: keep running in your sick and chronic condition. Keep running when your marriage only gets worse. Keep running when running makes you completely emotionally drained. Keep running when you don't think you could go on another day, another hour, another minute, another second. And he says this, and if you think that sounds impossible, listen to the rest of Hebrews 11. And they came up to the walls of Jericho, impossible, impregnable walls. But God, with his crazy designs and how he works things out, when you walk around and blow some trumpets, guess what? They all came down. Who would have thought that? The conquest of Canaan, giants and everything else that came into their way. But there was no one, no matter how strong, how big, how outnumbered Israel was, they would never lose. The Red Sea, impossible. How are you going to get out there? Pharaoh's on this side, Red Sea on this side. How do you get through? Because we serve a God who can do the impossible. He can part the Red Sea, and what's good for us becomes death for someone else. the lion's den. It says, fiery furnaces that leave you thinking, this is end. This has got to be the end for me. But it's not. There's a really cool book. It's not Christian. It's called Extreme Survivors. And in it, is story after story about people who endured in crazy circumstances only to survive. Can I tell you, that's what we ought to be. We ought to be some extreme endurers. That's who we are. And if you haven't figured it out by now, you have to come to the realization that the question that Paul is asking us tonight, the question is not if you are running, but how you are running. Because it matters how you run. I hope you realize that. See, we all need to run, but we need to run a certain way. We need to run like Jesus ran. And in order to do that, he says, we need each other. When I was in my senior year of college, I came home because we were living in England at that time. My parents lived there on my dad's job. And so I told my dad, hey, I really haven't been as serious as I should over my first 3 years of sports, and I want to be serious. So he goes, I've got exactly what you need. And so the next day, I went down to my dad's building, and I went up to his office, and he says, I want to introduce you to, and I can't remember because I'm 61. But a little girl, she was 5 foot tall, and I'm not lying to you, and she weighed 98 pounds. She was Scottish from Edinburgh, and I couldn't understand but maybe every third or fourth word. Her accent was so strong. She says, you are going to be in the best shape, and she's going to help you. And I go, her? Dad, look how little she is. He goes, you're wrong. Swallow it and go do it. So Hyde Park is almost 5 miles around. And so I was running at the time maybe like 8.5 minute miles. So she ran a marathon, 5 minutes and 40-second miles for 26 miles. I was doing 2 miles. So she said, let's go. We're going to run around the thing. So we started running, and literally, I'm not lying to you, for the first mile, she ran backwards, talking to me, encouraged me. She was still faster than me when I was running forward. It was awful. So she timed me, and here's what she said. These words I did get. She goes, you have a long way to go. By the end of the summer, I was running 5 minute and 40-second miles like her for 5 miles. Never in my life had I done that. Never. I went back to soccer. It was like I was a different person. You know why? Because I had a partner. I had a partner that ran with me and ran backwards. Come on, get going, you lard. Let's go. Right? Ready? Commercial. Do you know what small groups and D groups are? They are endurance teams. That's what they're for. You know why everyone should be in? Craig was in our D group last night. He goes, I don't know why, Pastor Walker, everyone should be in a D group. I go, come on, I'm going to have you come up here. You know what he said? You know why? Because do we not all need endurance? And let me tell you this, you are making a mistake to think that you can do it on your own. We come to church, you know why? We need God and we need each other. We need someone who says, don't you dare give up. I'm coming over to your house this week. We're going to pray together. Let's go out to lunch because I'm going to encourage. You know why? We need it. We need someone who's going to step into our lives and say, you can do it with God's help. We can do it together. That's what small groups and D groups do. To run long when the pain is strong and quitting is wrong, you can't do that on your own. So you know what we need to do? We need to look backwards, just like they did, backwards into the Old Testament, backwards into people who have come before us, who ran the race, had bigger struggles than we do, but yet kept the faith. But that's the one part. The other part is the opposite, is that you need to look forward. In chapter 12, verses 1 and 2 of Hebrews, there are 5 participles, but only 1 imperative. The only imperative really is keep running with endurance. But really, if you want to say explanation of how to do that, here's how you do it. You do it because you know you're surrounded with witnesses. You do it by laying aside every weight and the sin that besets you. You do it by looking unto Jesus as he despised the shame. You put all that together and say, here's how you run with endurance. Here's how you do it. All the participles tell us how to run, positively and negatively. In verse 12, verse 1, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which clings to us so closely. The little let us word, the exhortations, 14 times. It's a big deal in Hebrews. What it means is, lay aside is a term that means put on and take off your clothes. Here's what he says, when you run, you better have the right gear. Now, I told you I was a runner, but I don't know much. Dennis will be way better off than me. But I can tell you today, you have this certain shorts that you wear, shirts that you wear, they can't weigh too much, and you have shoes, and they're built a certain way, and you run. You have to have all this gear. And here's what Paul is saying. When you run, you know what matters? That you live holy. Because when you're not living holy, you know what it does? It will distract you and get you off the course that you're running. You cannot live in a strong faith when you're living in disobedience. You cannot. So he says this, take off the clothes of unrighteous. Take those things off, because you know what they do? They're impediments. They drag you down. They keep you from running, because shoes today, you wear these light pair of shorts and your light shirt, because you want to go faster and you want to go further. So you have the best equipment to do all of that for you. He says, so you know why? Because we run the race to follow Jesus who won the race. That's what we do. Please note this little grammatical part. There are parallel statements and they are crucial. Notice in 12:1, he talks to us and says, the race, here's the phrase, set before us. But look at verse 2. The joy set before him. They are parallel statements except for the word in front. Jesus, it says, we have the race set before us. He had the joy set before him. You see what he's saying? You know how you run? You look backwards and then you look forwards. This is what is before me. For Jesus, it was the joy. For us, it is the race. His race is our race. He is the best spiritual marathon runner there has ever been. And you know how we make it? We watch him. We look back at others, but mainly we look at him. He is the focus. We don't just focus on the finish line, we focus on the finisher, Jesus. If you read the entire chapter of Hebrews 11 and you read it closely, you'll find that the visual words are all throughout. Things not seen, chapter 11:1, so that what is seen and invisible, verse 2. He did not see death, verse 5. Events is not yet seen, verse 7. Looking forward to the city, verse 10. He saw them afar off, verse 13. Saw that Moses was a beautiful baby, verse 23. Looking to the reward, verse 26. Seeing him who is invisible, verse 27. You see how he builds his argument? All these people looking back, and he says all of those people that we looked at, they are climaxed in the runner of all time. You've looked at all of them, but here's what they all pointed to. The best marathon runner ever, Jesus. He says, look to him, because seeing him will change everything. What is it about him? Let me close with this. How do you run like Jesus ran? 3 things. Real quickly, each one. Who he is, what he did, and where he is. Who he is. Jesus is the founder and perfecter of our faith. Notice it doesn't say follow Christ. It followed Jesus. Why? It's his human name. They want you to, and he knows what it's like to suffer. He knows how difficult it is. That when you're tired and it's difficult for you, he knows how it is. If you run the Boston Marathon, and you can watch it on TV, they have a place you run 20 miles out of the 26. So meaning you're almost done. And then comes the most difficult part. It's called Heartbreak Hill. It is at a half a mile straight up incline. When you're at your weakest and your tiredest and you really want to be done, the most difficult part of the entire race is there. And you can see people struggling. It's the most notorious place in marathons where people stop and start walking or quit altogether. Heartbreak Hill. So tough. So difficult. But I can tell you this, there was another and greater heartbreak hill the hill of Calvary. Can I tell you this? I bet Jesus wanted to say, oh, I don't think I can climb that hill. I don't think I can get on that cross. He did. And he did it in the pain. Remember, run long when the pain is strong. Listen to Hebrews 12:2. He endured the cross, physical pain, despising the shame, social pain, hostility from sinners, verse 3, relational pain. He knew all of them. He hit Heartbreak Hill on Calvary's Hill, and he kept going. You know what that means? No matter how steep it is, no matter how tired you are, no matter how much tonight you want to throw in the towel, wave the white flag. I can't do this. Remember Jesus. Remember he says, consider him. When he had a harder hill to climb than you'll ever imagine, he never quit. He kept going. He made it. It was set before him, and so it's set before us. Can I tell you this? We cannot finish. We won't make it up Heartbreak Hill unless we can see the finish line. And I can tell you this, if you got your eyes on Jesus, you can see the finish line because he passed it. He passed it. So who is he? He's Jesus. What did he do? He endured the cross. Where is he? I love this part. You know how it ends? It almost seems like, why did they put that in there? He sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. You know why that matters? Here's why it matters. Because he ran and he finished. And he won against all odds, against everything. So that means this. Now at God's right hand, he's exalted. He's conquered. He's finished. He's vindicated. Everything. Oh, it looked like none of that would ever happen. Would it ever come? He did. He is seated because of where he is means this. You don't ever have to quit. You don't ever have to give up. Why? Because he finished and he's seated at God's right hand. And through him, you can run like that. And by the way, read Revelation. He's got a throne for you to sit on when you're done. He does. Never quit. It was an article in Runner's World magazine. Beth Ann was attempting to qualify for the Olympic marathon team in 1992. They were running trial marathons, and you had to complete the entire marathon. To qualify on the Olympic team, you had to do the entire 26 miles in 2 hours and 45 minutes or less. She was doing great, but the last couple of miles, she started to really fail. So she got to the last straight with 2 minutes so that she could be under time. She was at 2 hours and 43 minutes. She had 200 meters to finish. And that's when she stumbled and fell. She was so dazed, so tired, that she didn't get up right away. She sat on the ground for 20 seconds. Remember, she has 2 minutes left. She got off her feet and finally got to herself, and she began to start walking because she could not run anymore. She cut the 200 meters down to 5 yards. 5 yards left with less than a minute to qualify. And that's when she fell the second time. 15 feet away. She wasn't going to make it. The crowd went crazy. They're all chanting her name. They're all telling her, get up. They're yelling it to her, get up. She couldn't get up. So you know what she did? She crawled. On her hands and knees, she crawled as fast as she could, and she put her hand over the finish line with 3 seconds to go. She qualified. You know why? Because she never gave up. She endured. Oh, can I tell you this? Keep your eye on Jesus. Look at him. He finished. His uphill will be more than anything you've ever faced. And because of that, you can finish. Oh, I know sometimes you're going to fall. Sometimes you're going to feel like all I can do is crawl on this thing. But I can tell you this, the day that you put your hand over the finish line and you stand before him and you say, he says, well done, enter in, you won't regret a second of it. Endure. Are you? Let's pray. Father, help us. So easy to say that we should endure and talk about it and even preach it, but it's another thing to do it. day in and day out, month in and month out, year in, year out. And Father, if we get our eyes not looking backwards or forward, but looking around us, we won't cross the finish line. We're going to fall short. Oh God, help us. Help us to train our focus. Hebrews 12:11 says, it's those who have been trained by it. Oh, we need training. We need help. We need to keep each other going. Help us at Faith Baptist Church to love and care like that. That we might help each other endure, that we might cross the finish line together. And in that, may you be glorified. For it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You are dismissed.